Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is an immense privilege for me to be standing before you this morning. And I would like to observe all protocols because I don't want to flout any. But I would like to start this very short speech with my own personal story. And this will reflect the many lives of the people in my country and those in the continent. You have already heard in my introduction that I am from South Africa, but the truth is I am a true Southern African. My family roots span the three nations in the Southern African region of the continent: Lesotho, South Africa, and Botswana. And just like so many of us, during December holidays, we tend to visit our families. And this past December, I visited my family in Lesotho. And in fact, Lesotho happens to be the place I was born and spent my formative years, although I have lived in South Africa for most of my life. There were two moments that stood out for this particular December 2024 visit. And one of those moments filled me with immense hope, whilst the other one left me with a sense deep of concern about where our communities in the continent are going. I'll start with the positive news, of course. And it really reflects the first sign of progress. Just about 10 kilometers from my family homestay in the southern parts of Lesotho, I got an opportunity and a pleasure to visit a 30 megawatt PV facility. And I think for some of you seated around the room, you may feel that that's a minute, it's not quite significant. But for a country whose peak demand is 200 megawatts, 30 megawatts is no small feat. I think the takeaway from me was that even in small countries like Lesotho, the transition is well underway. Of course, yesterday I got an opportunity to talk about my other country where I work in and the great strides that have been made there. But for a small nation of Lesotho, seeing a 30 megawatt facility was really inspiring. But that was still juxtaposed with immense amount of poverty that surrounded it. The second moment is less optimistic. And it was a stark reminder of our region's vulnerability to the impacts of climate change. The very transition that all of us who are seated around the room and are attending meetings outside are spending most of their times and their careers working on. Now, the story is, for the 2 weeks that I visited my family in Lesotho, I could count 6 hours in which we had access to running water. If you work that out in percentages, that is a mere 2% of water availability in those 2 weeks. Now, for some of us who come and go, we do feel that we feel disadvantaged, but it is by no means the experience of the people who have to live with water scarcity and water shortage every day on drought seasons. And I think what was painful to observe was that, yes, there was water shortages, but that affected food security because the nation of Lesotho is known for subsistence farming. And everybody grows vegetables in their garden, maize, so that they can sustain themselves and their livelihoods. And so the water shortage incredibly affected the food security in the country. I'm talking about this village in the very tiny southern corner of a country that some people do not know where it is. However, it is an example of the growing crisis in most regions in Southern Africa, in most regions in Africa. And you have to live that experience to really grasp what it is like to live in a context where it is already being affected by the impacts of climate change. And I think what came to mind was that I believe that this energy transition, it's not just about reducing the carbon footprint to restrict rise in global temperatures. It's an incredibly important objective, again, for some of our developing countries, but Africa specifically. And it is also important that we use this opportunity that we have at the beginning of this transition to secure a sustainable future, particularly for the most vulnerable amongst our community. And I'll go back to that point in a couple of minutes. And admittedly, the transition is a global effort, but it's important that we emphasize that it needs to be sensitive of our local context. The context in Europe is not the same as the context in Africa. Neither is it the same as Asia or Latin America. So our solutions are going to be different. And it's upon us as leaders of these regions to design solutions that speak directly to our needs. I think what we need to think about around this transition is how does it empower the communities, the countries that we come from, and the regions to be not just have systems with low carbon energy systems, but how do they become productive? How do they become sustainable in the true sense? And how do they become resilient? Going back to my December holiday, I would want to just advance about 3 points. Whilst it was encouraging to see a solar farm so close to my home from an energy access perspective, it also raised very critical questions for me about whether this transition, energy transition, is genuinely, I'm underscoring genuinely and intentionally, used as an instrument to address the provision of basic services and contribute to the incredible levels of unemployment in our country and drive a true inclusive and equity amongst our communities across the board, not just in Africa, but globally. So I'm going to go through those 3 points in this order. Let's consider the first one about the provision of basic energy, and we know there are many. The statistic about those that do not have access to modern forms of energy have already been well articulated by the previous speaker. We probably haven't shared that of water, but it's a conversation that we can have outside. But it's food security. The levels of poverty in the continent are still incredibly high. But another concerning area is the health area. So when we think about these transitions and the interventions, we need to design them with all those aspects in mind. For instance, we can really tap into the productive use of renewable energy technology, which does not only improve energy access, addresses the basic needs of most of the economies, but it also stimulates economic and entrepreneurial activity and opportunities. And there are already good examples of where renewable energy technologies have been used in water pumping, irrigation, even in cold storage, but even across the entire agriculture and agro-processing value chain. And in other areas that provide services, in the health sector, in the storage of vaccines, in creation of jobs through transportation solutions. And there are great organizations across the country that are already working on this And I'm happy to have that conversation with them because I see my time is soon coming up. I'm going to conclude by making just 2 points. The second one, which is a highly contested debate in my country of South Africa, and possibly a contested debate, is the extent to which this energy transition will help address the high levels of unemployment that we're experiencing as the country, as the continent, and as the developing world. Indulge me by sharing with you the unemployment statistics in South Africa. The latest one is that 32% of South Africans are not employed. Well, that may seem like a big number, but if you go into the actual demographics and zoom into the ages 18 to 24, that goes all the way above 55%. What that means that every second young person that you meet is unemployed. It even gets worse when you go under the age of 20 to 24, 18 to 24. It's 70% of the people that haven't been employed. And so we know that our energy transition or a green economy transition holds a lot of job opportunities and potential. However, I think as these communities, what we communicate about our job potential needs to be extremely realistic. We do not want to raise the expectations and then fail. I just noted that we have tens and millions of unemployed youth just in South Africa. Imagine in the rest of the continent. Yet we are projecting for solar PV alone, which tends to be the lead generator of jobs in South Africa, that we will create over 3 million jobs up to 2030. But what the continent needs are tens and millions of jobs. So we need to manage our narrative so that we don't create false hopes as we ensure that we play our role in driving employment. I cannot leave the stage, Ma'am Melinda, by talking about another important issue that is very, very close to my heart. And that is about the inclusion and equity in this space, particularly as it relates to women and youth participation. I think what we need to ask ourselves as the community standing here is how do we meaningfully shape the transition that truly includes young people and women? And may we not serve any lip service. We know the statistics. Not only do we know the statistics, when we come to these conferences, we experience it. Yes, the men in our community tend to be immensely supportive of the women. However, we believe that unless women have positions in the decision making, we will not fully resolve this challenge. I'm going to mention just a couple of statistics to this effect. We know that half of the population is women. There's no brainer. In the energy sector, only 20% of women make the workforce. In renewable energy space, we are slightly better at 32%. But solar even better at 40%. But if you zoom into what these people do in these jobs, you find that they are far from decision-making power. Of course, we celebrate the women that are leading solar associations across the globe, in regions globally, and we applaud it, and we must have more of that. However, I'm of the strong view that when both women and youth are absent from decision-making, we lose the creativity, we lose the diverse perspectives, and the innovation that is necessary for lasting solutions. So we must create the spaces where women and young people are not just participants, but they are beneficiaries as well as decision makers in this place. So in conclusion, And this conclusion is directed to the developing world, especially my leaders in Africa. I think leaders, let us take an ownership of this transition. My sister, Dr. Rebecca, said one of the ways in which we could do that is to put the skin in the game. That doesn't have to be financial contribution, but we can build capacities in our organizations, especially when we transition to the next phase of this energy transition where we talk about critical minerals. We need to set our own agenda and make sure that we are the ones who drive the agenda to benefit from the wealth that our country have. Let us remember that the global agenda is our future. It is our prosperity at stake. And let's embrace the partnerships that enable this conference. But do not lose hope and sight of the fact that this is an energy transition for African leaders must be led by us, and it must be led for our own people. They said, please stop, and I thank you.